British have a real ease with hypocrisy over sex. We pretend we're scandalised by stuff, and then we buy The Sun and the Mirror and read 20 pages of it. I think nothing's better than sex. That should be top of the list. If men and women are constantly at loggerheads and frightened, there's not going to be another generation.
I agree.
But yes, sex is important, love is important. We're losing connection, and that people are being schooled about sex in the wrong way, and they're not knowing about sort of joy and intimacy and all these things.
2, 1, roll it.
This is StoryCo, the podcast about the business of story and storytelling. I'm James Kirkham. Let's get into it. My guest today ran the cleverest dirty magazine in Britain, a publican's daughter from Kent who took over a tiny newsletter and was editrice at the Erotic Review. 30,000 readers, novelists in its pages, a Navy ship amongst its fans, all in one heretical idea that the sexiest organ is the brain and what you suggest beats what you show. Rowan Pelling made that bet in the most sexualised culture in human history. Pornography is free, instant and infinite, every appetite catered for, in high definition, on demand, forever. But desire is dying. By most counts, the young are having less sex than their parents did at the same age. The generation that has seen everything wants the least. Rowan judged the Booker, won the Funny Woman Award, writes for The Telegraph, and is raising 2 sons inside the world she warned us about. For 30 years, she's argued that the explicit, the literal, was never liberation. Today, I want to ask her plainly, can desire be saved from pornography, or are we here to write its obituary? Rowan, welcome. Tell me a story.
So this story comes from a period in my life when everything changed. So I was 28, and until then I'd been doing sort of dog's body jobs, really, assistant on magazines. And then I was helping these 2 art dealers with their venture, the Erotic Print Society. And I started sort of fiddling around with the newsletter. Can I make this more like a magazine? And unexpectedly, it catapulted me into what I call a kind of minor notoriety. I was suddenly the erotic woman and had to go on Radio 4 to talk about it. And this meant it reached the sort of environment of my parents' pub in Kent, where my mum, who was sort of like Miss Marple in a way, not the sort of person you think would give birth to in a sort of erotic editrice.
The erotic woman.
No, she'd go around in sort of long white ankle socks and things. And she was walking through the woods and she saw someone she knew from the village coming towards her, quite a proper lady. And when the woman came close to her, she went up and she said, "Hazel, I'm so sorry about Rowan and that filthy magazine. That's terrible." And then my mother, who just was so supporting of all her 5 children, said, "Well, Betty Boothroyd started as a tiller girl, the Speaker of the House of Commons, was a dancer first, not totally naked, I think, but lightly clad. And she said, look at her now." And then this woman, once she'd sort of seen that my mum was supporting this idea, without batting an eyelid, barely a breath in between, she went, I think I might get Gerald a subscription for Christmas.
Oh my goodness, that's good.
And what I think this illustrates is the fact that the British have a real ease with hypocrisy over sex. We pretend we're scandalised by stuff, and then we buy The Sun and the Mirror and read 20 pages of it.
I think there's 30 years of tabloid headlines that would agree with you. Such a gorgeous opening, and the idea of Gerald then being a keen subscriber, I love.
Yeah.
Now, you brought in a copy of the Erotic Review. This one's from 99, the month I just noticed I actually started work. Beautiful illustration. Tell us about it. This thing, as you've just described in your opening story, became your identity, became who you were. Yeah. What was it?
And also, we had invented a woman before I sort of became editor. There was this woman called Emily Ford who used to sign letters, because there were 2 men started this company, and then I came along. And people would call me Emily Ford. They got confused. Is it Rowan? Yeah, there was just this erotic woman, and it was me. And we also sort of developed this thing where we would pastiche a famous painting. And, if you look, then there's sort of,
Yeah.
a naked lady crawling along. And if you look at the detail, it's subtle, but it's rude. And that was sort of what we did. And the great sort of thing that led to it suddenly being in the press was I got it into Waterstones. And I said, this is literary. Look, it's got Alain de Botton in it. It's got Oberon War. It's, it had
You were
these...
very convincing.
Yeah. Well, what they said actually is that the managers, in those days, the individual managers decided, and they said I could just go and talk to individual managers. So I just travelled around saying, would you take this?
Bespoke, store by store,
Yeah.
deciding on the basis, the manager deciding on the basis of their own particular set of peccadillos.
Yeah.
And who was it for? Who was the reader? Because it got big, right? 30,000 people.
Yes. Well, it got big. We advertised in the Times and the Telegraph. And often beside the Telegraph crossword. And I realised that our audience... it was sort of... I would say it was maybe a few more men than women, but not much. And also what was really different about it to any other erotic publication, it was clearly for couples. It wasn't to be hidden away. It wasn't like, I'm not going to show my other half. It was a sort of flirtation device, if you like, something that could be taken to bed. You could read it to your best beloved. It would be on the pillow. It was for men and women to sort of really enjoy erotic connection. And quite a lot of my writers, I sort of soon discovered that there was a kind of alchemy that happened. People fell in love through the magazine, and then they'd start writing something sexy for their lover. Yeah.
How wonderful. I love the idea that a magazine as a flirtation device. That's pretty impactful, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's quite powerful.
Well, I didn't, of course, because I was so young. I wasn't even thinking about it. I was doing what made sense to me, and I'm a romantic. I really, really believe, in the possibility of love, and that even if love doesn't last, that you will find it again, and that you must always be sort of, alert to desire and the good things in the world, and just filled with life, joie de vivre, and project that. And I wanted the magazine to be like that, to be witty, a bit funny. The thing about the British is that we like laughing in bed, and that's not very Latin.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That's not very Latin. I've never thought that way.
Yeah.
So it's a very British thing. I guess more recent examples is Hugh Grant, Four Winners in a Funeral, and the kind of sweet, jokey manner with which those scenes are kind of conveyed.
Although I think that's slightly bumbling, inept British male. I don't really
So it's less of
subscribe to
that.
that.
Go on.
No, I don't actually. And I think women can be strong, but men should be strong too. I do think, there's this unwritten rule that even people who say they don't like men in a uniform, I've watched my most sort of feminist, I stand on my own, female friends melt when they see an army officer in uniform.
Really?
Yeah. You can't really argue with something that is attractive about, men being, I think, able to fight by your side in the zombie apocalypse.
And talking of men in uniform, you've had an entire Navy ship's worth of men part of this.
I haven't
readership.
personally had an entire ship of.
Yeah.
We had a fan letter from I can't say which ship, but it was HMS something, and the commanding officer basically had said to them, you can't have porn, but you are allowed this.
Really?
And then we got this wonderful fan letter, so we kept in correspondence for a while. Yeah.
So, do you think that's just the nature of it being what it is, the illustration? You've had incredible writers writing on it. It's genuinely creative. It's but it plays a very distinct and unique role to be juxtaposed in the Telegraph alongside the crossword, or be described as the banning of pornography on ship, but they'll allow that.
Yeah,
I can't think of another example similar.
No, and apparently Richard Desmond, who was doing his porn mags at the time, got very cross. I was told there was a meeting at Northern and Shell where he sort of walked in and went, look at this, how are they able to do this and make it mainstream? Really? And I guess it was.
What do you put that down to?
Tone, I think you have to know the tone. Yes, intelligence, tone, recognition that in literature, Anais Nin or Henry Miller, we're not being ruder than them, because you can't be. And those books are in bookshops. So why can't we be in a bookshop? I will tell you, W.H. Smith's wouldn't take us.
Really?
Yeah.
Did they say why?
Yeah, we had it on our front cover as the sort of strapline for a while. It just said, this is not the kind of thing we think our customers would like.
Oh, wow. Okay, there we go. I mean,
Go
that
with
must
it.
have empowered it even more, right?
Yeah, because I'm not, this sort of thing, it's not going to go to Puritans. It's going to go to Cavaliers. You know, that's how Britain divides, right?
Go on, explain
Well,
for our international viewers
okay.
that notion of I love that, Puritans and Cavaliers.
And Oxford obviously was quite a centre for the Cavaliers and the people who were pro the king. These were the people who wanted to bring the monarch back, put a king on the throne, bring back dancing, bring back merriment, sex, all those sort of fun things, Christmas. And the Puritans were like, dress in black and white, don't dance at Christmas, you know, always in prayer mode. Here's another thing. I think you can be spiritual. Actually, I'm a churchgoer. Surprises people. I'm not a very good one, obviously.
But you attend.
Yeah, I attend and I find it really comforting. But, you know, there's nothing in the Bible about sex, really, not in the New Testament, except saying, let's not stone that adulteress. And that's my general thing. Why are we having a go at people for their sexuality, for their desires, whatever it is?
Is it distinctly British?
Yes, I mean, this magazine could only really work in Britain. We did have American subscribers, but they were those sort of Americans who feel quite British,
And have a
you know.
fascination with all things British culture. But do you think there's something in that almost lens or holding up the mirror to ourselves that was part of its success? Again, it held a
Yes.
very distinct place in society, in media, full stop,
Yeah.
let alone amongst
Yeah.
sex and appetite for it.
Well, there was a moment when we were on a Radio 4 comedy show as a punchline. I think they said the magazine was penthouse for people who actually live in one because our clientele was quite...
It's a good line.
Yeah, it was a good line. Well, I mean, our clientele wasn't that wealthy, but, you know, I'd look at the address list and I think, the old rectory and, you know,
Yeah.
somewhere in Buckinghamshire.
Yeah, beautiful, the
or-
vicarage.
Yeah, the vicarage. Always the vicarage and Rose Cottage and that sort of thing.
What were the
And
readers paying for, do you think?
I think they were paying to engage with that part of themselves that really believed in flirtation and delight and eroticism rather than just pure sex. You know, this kind of thing of erotic love that actually, you know, when people start saying, oh, I'd rather have a cup of tea or this car is pure sex, it makes me cross. I think nothing's better than sex. You know, that should be top of the list.
Do you
So I
still
think,
believe that?
Yes, I do. I really, really do. I mean, obviously, once you have children, your love for your children is a massive thing, and that's one sacred thing. But for me, the other sacred thing is the way that you erotically, with your heart and with your body, connect to someone else, and with your imagination, of course. For me, that's the greatest drug there is, you know.
But that's very powerful, and to be saying that now, this huge decline again in sexual appetite of young people physically, literally having less sex.
Yes, I've watched this decline, and here the NatSal, the National Survey of Sexual Attitudes and Lifestyles, has been mapping it since I think about 1990. But there's this definite decline. They call it fewer sexual incidents, but they mean
Right.
just like significant,
Yeah.
you know, coupling or, you know, probably heavy petting. I don't know how they define it, but that's happening less and less, especially for Gen Z, you know, people 20s, teens. And I do think, obviously, that it can't be coincidental that they're the digital generation, the natives who were born in that landscape. The things that happened to us when we were growing up, we're quite bored, right? I was very bored a lot of the time when I was young. There weren't so many
Boredom doesn't
distract-
exist now.
No. So we had to develop a kind of imaginative space, often a romantic imaginative space, a hinterland, a space where we maybe lived in our fantasies more.
That's nice.
And they're having fantasies projected at them, kind of built, constructed, and they're constructed in a way to make young people want to shop, spend money, get addicted to something online, you know, spend money here. And it's absorbing people's space. And I think it's happening to all sorts of age groups. I'm going to say I'm guilty. I sometimes have to just put my phone and my computer away and stop looking at the things
course.
that for me, it's a terrible confession. It's eBay and vintage.
Yeah, that sounds a pretty good triumvirate.
Yeah, but I just go, like, why am I doing this? I should actually
it's
be living.
Yeah, my son's sort of late teens now, and much of our time we talk about get yourself off those devices to engage in something else. And yet these were engineered to be addictive in their instance,
Yeah.
and they were kind of bequeathed them almost immediately, and then we're like, oh my God, you shouldn't spend so time on it. So I think they've been given quite a rum
Yeah.
deal.
And obviously porn is addictive. I don't think it's just porn that's stopping them, but I think there has been this rise of an idea that when I say good sex, athletic, ticking boxes, you've got to make people turned on in certain ways. And I think that's frightening. So when I was young, you just sort of bumbled around like an amateur. You did some bad kissing, some bad touching. It got better. No one was recording anything. There weren't so many comparisons. You weren't so aware of it. And so you could go on your own sort of trajectory and just accidentally find delight without feeling under that pressure.
That's so incredibly true versus I have seen or I'm aware of there is a performative manner or a script that I need to follow, and everything becomes quite mechanical and act like.
Exactly. And it's, I didn't realise how lucky we are, having reading and sort of slow TV. You had to really wait for something that was great, and then it stayed with you for the rest of your life,
So true. Yeah.
Go down. I remember watching sort of torrid sex scenes in I, Claudius. I mean, I must have been quite young, and I certainly shouldn't have been watching it. There was a sort of crack in the door. You came down this little staircase, and it was a little cupboard staircase, and if the door was just open a bit, you could look at adult TV. I saw these things, and they stayed with me forever.
Do they stay with you in a good way, do you think?
They've certainly made me who I am, and I don't feel they were bad, but I guess I wouldn't have been doing it if I hadn't been different from, say, there's 5 of us, children in my family, and we're all different. So there was something about me that made me more restless. I never wanted to sleep till late. I was curious. I wanted to sort of know what adults were about, and
Really?
I was always interested. You don't have words for it, right? When you're a child, you don't know what this thing is that fascinates you. But I realised afterwards that I was pretty much fascinated by adults who had some sort of what I call erotic glamour. Parents of friends who were in some way sexy, although I would never have said it was that. It was charismatic and sexy. And you'd think, what is it, this thing they have?
And what is that? That's very innate then, isn't it? And as you say, it's borderline nothing to do with sexiness in the way that most people would describe when they're out there on the street.
I think it's the most interesting thing pretty much on the planet, how some people who may not be good looking at all or thin or go to the gym or any of the stuff that, and this is another thing, I think the problem for young people, they're confusing these things with what it is to be sort of alive and charismatic and sexy. And people who inhabit their bodies and their minds in certain ways. So I think you can be a very good-looking actor or actress and not have that. You can maybe even project it as an actor, and then you meet that person. That certainly happened to me. And I thought, you don't actually have that sort of allure. And then you'll just, be at the library or just buying a coffee, and you immediately know the person you're talking to has this incredible, allure energy. And they used to call it, just it. They have it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say it's a sort of erotic, intellectual glamour.
But even you dissecting and describing it and talking the way that you do, you're dealing with something that I'm not sure is touched upon much these days. Sat here right now, you can prompt for porn in probably in a mere matter of seconds. You have projections, as you say, put onto you, even big series, Love Island. It's not like there's much variety of the male form in a show like that. So there is an assumption of what, inverted commas, good looking is or handsome is. I read in your 20s you spent a lot of time around older men. Now, these days, perhaps that might be looked at in one way or seen as, my gosh, were they preying on you? Was it like that? Is it misremembered, that era?
I didn't feel it was, and I also felt that was, again, particular to me. I've got 2 sisters. I'm the only one who spent quite a lot of my life with older men. But my father was 27 years older than my mother, and I grew up in a pub where there were people of all ages. I really liked talking to older people. I really liked the idea you're almost sort of downloading a whole section of learning without having to do it the hard way sitting in school.
That's great.
So when I met this, I was 23 and I was working on Private Eye, and I was the editor's assistant. So I was in his lot, sort of, PA, running around doing stuff. And I met this older guy at a party, actually, at the launch of the Oldie mag. And he looked like Beethoven. He was 50, he had cloud of white hair, He was short. He was in no way good looking. But what I noticed about him, first thing, is at this crowded party, 20 beautiful women were grouped around him. They were talking to him. He was, vibrantly sort of flirting with each and every one of them. But intellectually, I could see that. I could see he was the person, the funniest, the most interesting. So I sort of went over to, find out what was going on there. And then I got sort of caught up. And then he took me out for dinner. And then I got really drunk. And the next morning I woke up in his bed, fully clothed. So he was a gent. And that's how that sort of relationship began to kick off. And the reason I was with him for 2 years is because it was an education. And suddenly, he knew about architecture. He was an architect. He was polymath. He knew everything about history. He knew a lot of really interesting people. So we would be swept around the country, sort of ending up in the most interesting houses.
So it was all right to be impressed. It was all right to have that feeling of being educated. We're not talking that long ago, but I find the swiftness of the change in, if you like, an interesting one, because you describe that as an education, which sounds wonderful and romantic. And
really
why wouldn't
was.
that be a lovely time?
Yeah, and I didn't feel I was being patronised. I felt like we were getting good exchange. He was getting my sort of youth and vivacity, but I was interested and he was interesting. Also, he did tend to date younger women, I have to say. It was just that we had a connection. Now, he wasn't the love of my life, which is why it ended, and nor did I have the best sex of my life with him. But at that moment, I hadn't been really properly in love. So, in fact, it was better sex than I'd had with very careless younger men. My life was so much more exciting. I went out to the Balkans with him when the war was happening.
Wow.
In fact, it was his friend, Jamie, who started the Erotic Prince Society and the Erotic Review. So my job doing that came out of that, going away with these two rather sort of loose older men.
Wow.
Jamie also had his much younger girlfriend, who he then married with him. And we went out to a war zone.
In the early 90s, this must have been.
No, it was Dubrovnik was being heavily shelled. We travelled in a blacked out ambulance. So when I was asked, do I want to go out there? And all my friends said, no, tell him no. I have this theory, and this is a really good one for young people, that unless there's a good reason to say no, you should be open to the yes. Just see where it takes you. And that's storytelling too. See where the story takes you.
That's nice.
If you say no, that's the end of the narrative. Now, I'm not saying go off with the mad axe murderer. But I'm saying, obviously, the sensible answer, don't go to a war zone. But I went, and it was one of the most amazing things I've ever done.
You describe yourself in the 20s, and I really love the way you were exploring and the curiosity and the education and the openness of that. And just before you came into the show, my mum was also the daughter of publicans, but she didn't love it. She always said to me that her parents, because they were so gregarious at the bar, speaking with the locals, I think she just felt the attention wasn't on her as the sort of the oldest child. But it sounds like you used it almost for your own benefit without realising. You found it a source of knowledge and learning.
I am absolutely a barmaid at heart. I was formed in that. I am. I'm Babs Windsor. I may not sound like it, but I am. And, that's...
I love that.
Yeah, I just feel
What makes a good barmaid? A brilliant listener, for starters.
Yeah, you have to be a good listener. You mustn't register boredom. You should be a bit flirty, I think. I think a bit rude not to be. You've got to be good with boundaries too. And that's a funny thing. I think I'm very open and very flirty, but actually I can put in a firm boundary when I need to. If something's going too far, just go, you have the lingo to tell someone off, just stop it, shut something down.
To your point earlier about you are prepared to say yes and not immediately say no. This notion that you can listen, it's almost, these are rules of life, aren't they? Being a great barmaid is being great at living this life that we're in.
Well, also, the key thing for the moment, that when you grow up in that environment, you have to listen to people with very different political opinions, often very strong, often drunk, right? Saying outrageous stuff, and people, you have some total Tory there, and then someone who's just voted Labour all their life and they want to have a punch up, and you've got to be able to steer that conversation and make sure everyone stays safe within it and it doesn't end up in fisticuffs. My mum, I have to say, was brilliant at this.
Go on.
She loved politics and she loved reading, and she would always ask people what they were into and what was going on, and she'd have magazines on the bar. We grew up with Country Life because she thought people liked property porn. Awesome. We had Punch, and then she thought it got boring, so that's when we bought Private Eye, and that would have so I had my childhood with Private Eye reading it.
I obsess about magazines. I love magazines. I kind of make a bit of a mag these days. Tell us a little bit about the Amorous 2017, nearly 10 years ago, right? What was your vision with that? Why didn't it land? To explain what it was.
Well, actually, it was on plan. So I think it could have landed if we just ran out of money.
Right.
So we were steadily putting on sales. But the Amorist, I saw it as the sort of, it succeeded the Erotic review. And, there weren't so many boundaries, limits with what you could do. There was more photography in the Amorist. And also, it was more aimed at women. It was very much starting with women.
Interesting.
And that was before Me Too. But I just had this sense, now we're not going in with men. We're going in with women. And then they will be the ones who give this to their boyfriend, husband, partner, whatever. And still the flirty vibe. But one thing that really changed, I remember when my publisher suddenly said, "Oh, great, we're doing the autumn issue. So there's a real chance to put a woman dressed as a schoolgirl on the front cover." And he's the same age as me. And I just went, oh, no, we can't do that. So we didn't do that, obviously. And literally 6 months later, we were in the midst of Me Too.
I mean, what a piece of timing to say no, by the way. Not that you would ever have said yes.
No, and I feel I've had to have that head on. I've had to keep on thinking times have changed. I'm different.
Yeah.
My limits are different. There's certainly things that I didn't object to in the 90s that now I would feel enabled to be much stronger about that. And so, I just feel the Amorist was very much a women's magazine and had a really, like the way it looked, it was just really sensual and gorgeous paper. And I loved that magazine, actually.
I have my own theories that in this era of kind of algorithmically driven content, mags and physical objects and artifacts and paraphernalia like that are essential. They're essential for our memories, our feeling, our touch, our something to grab hold of. They almost have a gravitational pull outside that a screen can never do.
I think so.
But I love the fact that you grew up with them. And I think you said just before we came in that you kind of trace it all the way back to being like 7 years old, and you were making little fanzine style.
Yeah, I was amazed to find that I was always making magazines from as soon as I could glue things together and write things.
Love that.
And so there's ones from primary school, but what's really funniest is there's these ones when I'm probably like 13, and I am writing my own problem pages. I am writing about sex, even though I have no idea about this. I'm answering people's sexual problems. And
I wonder where that came from. That was so in you to want to had a fascination with the subject, but also probably an ability with writing and a craft.
Yes. I think it was also partly I was always reading things I shouldn't be, James Bond books that belonged to my dad and Jilly Cooper and even Lady Chatterley's Lover. I remember getting their Penguin copy and thinking, where is this famous dirty bit?
Really?
Yeah, quite far in, so you have to...
Has it transpired, viewers?
Yeah.
if you're into it.
Yeah.
You mentioned, what started as the kind of the newsletter and became the magazine, but there was almost an accident that you arrived there.
Totally.
But it feels now that you're describing a childhood in earlier times. It feels like you were always going to end up there. Yeah. Would that be fair to say that?
Well, I suppose, I got a very bad degree. So if anyone's listening and they did very badly at university, I got a third-class degree in English literature. That wasn't a happy, good period of my life. And so I didn't feel, and, my parents had a pub, I didn't feel confident that I could go and work in publishing, magazines or any of those things. And it was just luck meeting someone who got me my first job. And then I was working on GQ, but I got fired. I always say I got fired.
Why did you get fired?
I mean, one, I wasn't the world's greatest PA. That is fair enough. But they had said it was going okay. But I think the big thing, and I can never prove this, is I started sleeping with the deputy editor, who is now my husband. And the editor kind of just went, oh, I think I
can't handle this. I don't know what
can't
to
handle
do.
it. I talked to my deputy about one thing. This is my PA. I tell her
Yeah.
other secrets. I can say this because Michael, who I adored, sadly died years and years ago. I don't know whether you ever came across Michael Vermeulen.
No, I know the name.
He was an epic man, but he was a walking party.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that era, full stop.
Oh, the boys, the lads
Was that
mags.
because, that was kind of glory days of magazines, certainly in this country, right?
Yeah, I think it was fun. This is what I keep on saying to people in media, younger people. I think we did have the best of it in the 90s. Looking back on it, those magazines were really overstaffed. I mean, there were hundreds of people. There were assistants for assistants. There were big budgets. There were expenses. There were long lunches. I mean, Michael, I would do his expenses. Bearing in mind this is the early 90s, about £40,000-50,000 just on his expenses. Every Friday we were in the Groucho, the whole office. Yeah, everything was going on.
It's
you
a
can
bad
imagine.
some envious of those times.
Yeah.
Just a tiny bit too young. I was still at university.
Yeah, he'd go a 3-bottle of wine lunch, followed by double brandies, followed by a trip to the Groucho.
So it really was like you hear. It really was
Yeah.
like the shows and the
Yeah.
documentaries and the stories that we read.
Well, I'll tell you, because GQ was more like that. Obviously, if I'd been working on Tatler and Vogue, I don't think it would have been.
No.
That's-
More refined?
Yeah, and also you wouldn't have been eating because, you had to
course.
be
Yeah.
a tiny twiglet. But I loved being on that lads mag.
There was a craft on what was being done, though, whether it be down to layout, design, the sheer
Yes.
brilliance of the writing,
Yes.
actually. Quite brilliant stuff.
Totally brilliant. I remember seeing Loaded for the first time, and my reaction was, oh my God, this is genius. And there was a sort of cover that has like, beer, blah, 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 birds, blah, 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 footy, blah. It was really taking the piss out of the whole idea of a men's magazine. And we felt a bit, in all honesty, the people working on GQ, we felt suddenly a bit staid
I'm
and
sure.
old and
Almost
behind.
overnight.
Yeah, and everyone, used to think that GQ was a bit, gentleman's quarterly.
Sure.
Who cares? Now
Yeah.
you've got Loaded.
It changed almost immediately, didn't it?
Yeah.
I love the idea, though, that this almost identity emerged from the kind of paraphernalia of the culture that surrounded him. Tell me more about how then you now, as a parent, for example, how are you adapting now? Are you trying to fill your children's minds with the world that goes on? Do you steer them away? Do you worry?
I'm surprised by how much they remember that I did very early on kind of intervene and say, in reasonably explicit terms, why I think porn is boring and detrimental to the imagination. I have to be realistic. I know that they will at some point see it, but really try to steer their emphasis towards love, respect, treating women well.
You have 2 boys, right?
Yeah, two sons. Yeah. One's 22 and one's just 18.
Yeah.
And we actually had quite an involved conversation. I was upset they were using the word pussy and often using it, in fact, just to mean coward, in the way boys do. And I told them I found that very offensive. I said, I think it's a porn word. You're using a sacred part of my anatomy, the bit of me that made you, right? You're using that to call someone cowardly, and I won't have it. I prefer that you say cunt. And it's an old English word. It's a power word.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, it's true. You can feel the power of
We
the
definitely
word.
can't keep repeating this word, but I notice you have this on a necklace, a piece of jewellery that you're wearing today.
With a Y. It's my favourite word. And so it's not this kind of American porn sort of slightly stupid word, I think. I mean, each to their own. I'm not going to, but I didn't like it as a kind of default word in the erotic review.
So how do they respond, your boys, to your... Do they understand?
Yeah, it's been a bit tough for them. I mean, only mildly. They've both gone through a stage when their friends suddenly realise, oh, your mother did this.
Really?
Yeah, and their friends have found pictures of me wearing lingerie.
Really?
And yeah, infamously, there's
How did you deal with that?
So I just said, in the spirit of my mother, I don't regret anything. I'm really proud of it. It was an amazing time. I felt very empowered, which I really did. I don't look back and say, oh God, how silly I took my clothes off. I think, look, I looked fantastic. Why should anyone be cross with me? We're not cross with Daniel Craig coming out of the sea in his
amazing.
boxers, in his budgie smugglers. So why should anyone think it is worse for me to wear, some sexy underwear?
And your boys are right, maybe they're just past that age. My boy's a year younger than your youngest. It's definitely a world I know. Have you been able to take your lovely, I guess, liberal but freedom, have you been able to bring that to bear as a mum to them when it comes down to things like talking about sex?
Well, certainly my 18-year-old is still at the stage where he does not want to talk about it. But my 22-year-old son is amazing. He's really open, tells me in detail, I don't think too much, but about his relationships, sexual etiquette, making sure that he has good sort of sexual etiquette with women, that he's not behaving like a player or disappointing anyone.
It's probably a more British thing, and I'm saying this is a middle-aged English man, by the way, who probably would not be as able to speak with such openness and eloquence so easily, but should.
The only thing I will say, because I think times have changed so much, I have really hammered into them consent. And not just no means no, but you have to almost intuit if someone is in any way feeling reluctant. And I think that generation have absorbed that so much. The men, I think, are now seen as really vulgar if they go up to a girl they don't know and say, oh, you're gorgeous, you've got beautiful eyes. Isn't it? Well, what it results in, if that's seen as vulgar and creepy, then you are automatically thrown back onto the world of dating apps. It amazes me that all the young kids are on dating apps.
What do you think of dating apps?
I just don't know. I mean, every now and then a friend of mine has met the love of their life. Great. So they have a place, definitely. But I think for the young who should be out there meeting each other in the wild, if you like, university, jobs. And by the way, the working from home has ruined a lot of things for young people. That's terrible. I met people at work all the time.
Well, but now most of those workplace experiences that we all had, probably for me in my 20s or whatever it might have been, and those early years of work is where you make mistakes. It was finding your way in a world that now you would be ruthlessly exposed or cancelled or whatever the version of that is. That worries me.
There's no erasing of that history, particularly for men. And I think this has become such a minefield that they're on the apps and then there's no chemistry there until you meet, and then maybe there's less chemistry than you sort of hoped for, but you go along with it. And I think we were much more trained in what I was talking about, that delight, that sudden moment of thinking, I have this spark, this sort of something with someone that's so mysterious.
Because you weren't judging on an aesthetic in the first place, because you weren't even judging, because you might have been in a queue for the water cooler or the kettle.
Exactly. And because you're working together, it sort of builds, and it's incredibly sexy because it's happening slowly quite often, because you're not necessarily just going to get together with someone in an office because you're working together.
It builds.
Yeah, and I remember that being absolutely glorious, the couple of times it happened to me.
Right now, as you say, you've got two young sons. There's an awful lot written about, I guess, young men right now. Scott Galloway talks very well about it. His surprising reaction to the recent Louis Theroux Manosphere doc was he goes, well, first off, at least men are talking to each other. And that sort of shocked me because, like, Christ, though, have you seen what we're talking about? But his point is there was, prior to this, basically no discourse. Then there is some. Unfortunately, it's been filled up with basically perhaps the wrong kind of men with the wrong kind of opinions or the wrong kind of attitudes, certainly in the eyes of many. But it feels like you've got an awful lot in your armour and all you've done for so many decades and all you've written and the people that you've worked with. That's needed now more than ever.
Well, it's nice that you say that because it is what I try and do. What we're seeing, basically, I mean, it's this basic. If men and young men and women are constantly at loggerheads and frightened and feeling they're going to be held to some standard about their behaviour, about their sexual performance, going to be compared to porn, always anxious. And somehow, if they can't find this middle ground, this fun, jokey, flirty bit, there's not going to be another generation.
I agree.
And also, young women, quite rightly, are scared of giving birth because our, maternity services have been pretty dire. I just think, Christ, imagine if you had all that in your head all the time.
But the flirtation device is the means with it, is the way you describe the Erotic Review. Yeah. We need that again.
We do. We want to bring the joy back and the delight in each other and the feeling. Also, this feeling that it's not a lost cause. There's a survey with young French women really putting sex as much lower than they ever have in terms of priority. Like, we don't care that much about sex. I was like, well, you haven't had the right sex then. Because actually people will jeopardize everything. Clinton was prepared to blow up his presidency.
Yeah.
Because Monica Lewinsky was gorgeous.
Do you think a lot traces back to that moment?
Yeah.
Do you just...
I mean, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I think, thank God, that Lewinsky over a long period of time has been able to wrestle back the narrative and really get some form of agency and keep telling her story. She was treated so badly.
So badly. It's
Yeah.
a powerful story now.
Women certainly carry on taking the biggest sort of blow in terms of if an affair is discovered, women pay the biggest penalty, and they're also always seen as sort of scarlet. They lured the man away, you know. That still happens. I think women, obviously there's much more pejorative words used than, you know, slag and slut and all this stuff. So, you know, it's not like we've come miles. I think that still happens. But at the same time, it just seems a shame that as women are wrestling with this and finding agency, that young men should be kind of, it's not exactly demonized, but they get a very bad rap, like they must always be watching Andrew Tate and porn, you know, 24/7. And that seems unfair, because I just look at the young men I know, they're doing all the things that all those loaded boys were years ago, beer and footy and think about things pretty bright, you know, reading books.
Absolutely.
Mostly they're out there in the world.
I agree. Yeah, I coach a football team that I've done for about since they were like 7, and now they're all 18 and bigger than me and with beards, as you can imagine.
Right,
But
yeah,
they're
yeah.
a most amazing group of young
Exactly.
men. I adore them, and seeing them they've grown into, and articulate and smart and all of the above. The bit that worries me about them and my son's age and your son is the part about the inability to make mistakes that we once had.
Yeah.
And I don't mean terrible crimes. I mean the real basic little bits, fumbling your
Yeah.
way, mumbling, even approaching
Yeah.
girls in a way and stammering over a point because you were nervous and getting tongue-tied.
Yeah.
And that's the game.
Yeah, and working out maybe you don't want to go out with someone, but you don't want to upset them.
I think so much of what you've been talking about today on the show feels like advice, and it feels like just a very refreshing take. Where can we find, what are you writing? What are you doing next?
So I'm going to go back to my memoir, which when I started writing it, and I got bored with it because I just left
When
the
did you
erotic.
start?
Oh God, it was like 20 years
Wow.
ago. Everyone said, you had a baby, didn't you, Rowan? Or 22 years ago, just so you didn't have to write that book. And I was like, yeah. I'm a terrible procrastinator, but also I think that book would have been boring because it would have just been recent memory. Who wants to read a memoir about something that's just happened? You need to let it percolate.
That's interesting.
And also, it's become more like a story. I mean, this is StoryCo. Now it's a narrative to me. And the other narrative that's in there is about the British and sex. What do we like? What do we like as a nation? What are the things that I see time and time again? How have we changed? And why was that era, the 90s actually, kind of, there was a lot of sexual joy.
Yeah.
There was some terrible harassment,
Yeah,
etc., but a lot of sexual joy and fun in the 1990s. All my friends say that.
I can't remember the last time I read about the latent joy that frankly can be associated or aligned to it. I will only ever hear it in a post-Epstein, post-Weinstein, whatever horrific, disgusting individuals
Yeah.
who should be exposed. We should be chasing them to the ends of the earth, and the perpetrators, I think, however,
Yeah.
it shouldn't mean the subject can't be a subject that we should be loving and applauding and discussing and evolving, and that
Yes.
that evolution feels vital.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I got a piece in the Telegraph today actually in favour of strip tease, which is another. Do you remember that was quite a 90s thing? I had a stripper at my hen night,
Of course
and
you did.
Yeah, of course I did. And it was polite because there's an interesting lesson to be learnt about being teased. You can look, you can't touch. You sort of, there's a feeling, I think, because as a viewer, your own boundaries are being tested, and it's slightly thrilling.
If you're talking about something like, I mean, tease, I think it's a really interesting one, not least because we're in the era of absolute see anything at any point. There's almost no room for the tease. So I kind of, or rather it's missing. I think there's absolutely
I think,
room for it. It's completely
I think
missing.
Porn culture, which is really about commodification and commercialization. It's about paying this much bang for your buck, what's in the frame. And actually what I say about erotica is about always being teased and maybe shortchanged. Maybe this is the whole point. You don't get what you want. It's about a different relationship. The sort of voyeur, the photographer who you can't see, or the artist that you can't see. There's all these little invisible relationships. And a really good eroticist, I think, always leaves people wanting more, always shortchanges things.
Do you think then the lack of tease, the lack of even suggested chemistry that could be there, Is that why Strictly was so popular and no one really realised for the last 20 years?
Oh, subliminal eroticism.
There's people getting that on a Saturday night
Yeah.
thinking there could be something here. It's incredibly innocent, don't get me wrong, and it's about beautiful dance. But is there something there? Because we don't get it in any other part of our culture, our society, what we
That's
consume.
a very good point. It's very flirty. And of course, there's that great thing that dancing is a vertical expression of a horizontal desire.
Oh, that's so
Yeah. And
that's so good.
And I think we do get that. We absolutely understand it, that the minute you start to hold hands with someone and dance, especially formal dancing, it's erotic. It just is.
So did we forget to dance together as well?
Yes, I think you look at the young, they don't dance like that. We were all doing, quite a lot of hands together, Ciroc style stuff still. And
I'd not considered that for a while, but that's so true. Club culture, dance culture is a world I know, and this kind of idolatry of the DJ, then the moment became something that was a social media moment, i.e. you're just waiting for a drop. Everyone's standing there in a drone-like position, holding a phone out, waiting for an explosive moment of a particularly good part of a song. But there's none of the reasons why humans once danced together.
Yeah.
That isn't dance.
And the other thing is, which we haven't mentioned, they're living at home very often because they can't afford to do anything else with mum and dad. So they don't even have privacy. You know, I'd share a bedroom with a friend to be able to live more centrally in London than I could afford to do. But we're crammed in these little flats, and we'd have house parties.
Absolutely.
And people come round, and then some people would stay the night.
So there's this confluence of reasons and rationale why things have changed.
Yeah.
What are your Telegraph? Do you readers? Do you still see replies, comments? Do you?
I do look.
How do they react, for example, to you suggesting things like maybe bring the striptease back and all sorts of pieces that you wrote similarly?
Yeah, I wrote a piece earlier this year, and an MP, a Labour MP, Samantha Niblett, had, in conjunction with Cindy Gallop, who runs Make Love.
Who's amazing,
Is it Make Love, Not Porn? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
And they'd suggested there should be a summer of love in Britain. This is what we need. Summer of love, everyone should be making love and not being abashed. And of course, people were then criticising this MP and saying, is this what the Labour Party is focused on? There are bigger things to deal with. None of us argue that there are bigger things for the government to deal with. But yes, sex is important. Love is important. I think they were only saying what I'm trying to say here, which is we're losing connection, and that people are being schooled about sex in the wrong way, and they're not knowing about sort of joy and intimacy and all these things. So I wrote a big piece saying, yeah, bring it on. Let's have a ministry of sex, and I'll run it. And I got on the whole a pretty good response from Telegraph readers. I
find that really encouraging.
Yeah, I did. I mean, there were quite a lot of women actually replying to that. Having said that, of course, there were one or two who just kind of came down with moral thunder.
But you've said almost with tongue-in-cheek about the ministry, but there's something in that, because as you say, we're talking about human connection. We're talking about something that, from science to anthropological studies, we know there is a problem, and it's causing a fractured society and a lack of unity, and it's causing birth rates to decrease, and so on and so forth. There's an argument to say that the likes of yourself or a Cindy Gallop or many other people, I'm sure you could say, should be bands together and be a part of this thing trying to change things.
Or proper sex education in schools that does talk about intimacy, not just about sort of abstract stuff, but actually this rather embarrassing thing of what real erotic connection means with someone else. I mean, I'm not embarrassed talking about it, but if I was a math teacher, I might be. I think we should be talking about this to young people, and we should be saying there's an alternative to this kind of slightly arid, just meet someone on an app. And, there really is something beautiful about this.
Rowan, there's so much today that feels encouraging, dare I say. It feels like an era, as we've described, where whether it be our sons and their generation, and we've been concerned, I wonder if, and I hope we've reached maybe peak app where people are going to want to reconnect. This thing called sex in this place, Great Britain, shouldn't be something that should be so hidden away or shocking or something to sort of veer away from. Thank you so much for joining us today. I've loved every minute of it.
Thank you. I adored it too.
Thank you, Rowan. If you enjoyed this week's show, please follow us on Instagram at StoryCo Pod, subscribe on Spotify, hit the subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. It really does help. StoryCo is a Telltale Industries production. It's recorded in Studio One at the brilliant TYX Studios here in King's Cross. Produced by Jago Lee, assistant produced by Nellie Batt, and it's edited by Emma Gifford. Special thanks to Craig Hepsinstall, Jack Freegard, Tyler Newton and Issa Gibson. I'm James Kirkham. This has been a masterclass in how storytelling pays in this modern media landscape. Go out, tell a story that matters, and we'll see you next week.